And now it's time for us to discuss more of these headlines and simple keywords with Adam joining us via Zoom. Good morning, Adam.
Good morning, Lena. Happy Hump Day.
Happy Wednesday to you. Thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right, let's jump into the deep end of the pool. Day 2, our President Yoon's state visit to Washington. This is our first keyword of the day.
Day 2.
So President Yoon's busy schedule in the U.S. enters its second day with visits to memorials and business roundtables. What's the latest, Adam?
Yeah, certainly a very jam-packed schedule he's certainly having within the whole week. And day 2 is no different. And he opened his state visit to the U.S. by touring a NASA facility with Vice President Kamala Harris. Before the visit to the Goddard Space Flight Center, the two countries signed a joint statement on cooperation in space communications and navigation. That's, of course, all in line with President Yoon's kind of aim and pledge to boost Korea's space industry. They received briefings as well from NASA scientists on cooperative efforts on space exploration and addressing the climate crisis as well. So not just space exploration, but the whole purpose or aim for expanding the space industry is to try and get a better glimpse and picture of the changing climate as well by the use of satellites and whatnot developed by Korea. And he visited also, meanwhile, Arlington National Cemetery near Washington with his wife, Kim Gun-hee, and paid tribute to American service members buried there. Yoon laid a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, as it's known. He also visited an exhibition room where he presented a plaque commemorating the American service personnel who fought in the war. It read, "We will never forget, forgotten no more." Now, there was also a 21-gun salute from near the cemetery. So it was a very flamboyant affair. Yoon thanked the fallen American soldiers for their sacrifice. He also attended a luncheon celebrating the 70th anniversary of the bilateral alliance. He awarded South Korea's highest military order, known as the Taeguk Order of Military Merit, to 3 American veterans for their heroic actions during the Korean War. One of them was known to have actually jumped on top of a grenade as well to help his subordinates during the battle as well. Those 3 medals are given out. And also, meanwhile, Yoon promised the Korean government's continued efforts to recover the remains of the U.S. service members killed or gone missing during the war. There's still excavation operations in relation to that still going on. And he also vowed to fulfill the country's responsibility and role for freedom and peace in the world. And this all came, of course, before the much anticipated Yoon-Biden summit, which will take place on Wednesday at the White House, which will be followed by what's being reported as a lavish state dinner at the White House. So we'll have to see what's on the menu.
All right, we're getting some clues as to what that menu may entail. A fusion Korean-American affair you might add. Well, there's certainly a lot of buzz around it, so we'll talk about it in social media. I mean, if you're curious, stick around.
There's always risks with fusion food. I mean, I've had a lot of good ones, but the majority of them have been so good. But of course, I'm sure they'll fix up something nice.
Where's the faith? A little bit of faith this morning.
Sorry, I'm in a kind of a groggy mood this morning, so I think that's where it's coming from.
All right, we'll set that aside for social media a minute. Now, of course, the Korea and the United States, it seems they are at a critical juncture in economic cooperation, too. This brings us to our second keyword of the day.
Business deals.
So there were also a lot of business deals being made during the trip already. This is, of course, in line with Yoon's so-called sales diplomacy announcement by Netflix. A lot of collaborations, it seems. Can you tell us the details of the announcement so far?
Right, so all this political diplomacy is all very good and well, but I think one of the main purposes of the trip is, of course, economic cooperation. It's been led, or Yoon has been accompanied by one of the biggest economic delegations so far on any overseas trip that he's taken. Going into some of the deals that were made, for example, General Motors and Samsung SDI, they've announced plans to build a $3 billion new electric vehicle battery cell plant in the United States. The location is yet to be decided. That came after Yoon met with Netflix co-CEO Ted Sarandos, who said the firm would invest $2.5 billion in Korea on programming over the next 4 years. Also, 6 US tech companies agreed to invest a total of just under $2 billion in Korea's semiconductor, hydrogen, and environmentally friendly businesses. So basically, businesses, these future-oriented or future growth engines, as they're being called. The 6 companies include Air Products, Plug Power, On Semiconductor, Green Tweed, Pure Cycle Technologies, and EMP Belstar. So these are quite unfamiliar companies to those in Korea, but they are tech companies related to these future growth engines. Now, the announcement was made at a business roundtable a day after the investment pledge from Netflix. Some 180 business leaders from both countries attended the meeting, including the heads of Korean conglomerates. The total U.S. investment during Yoon's visit to the U.S. apparently amounts to $4.4 billion, according to the presidential office. Yoon told the event that the South Korean-U.S. alliance must leap into a new phase to jointly overcome crises. He said the bilateral security alliance should evolve into a supply chain and future-oriented innovative technology alliance. And he noted that core technologies from the US and South Korea's advanced manufacturing capabilities would create enormous synergies that will benefit both countries. So basically saying the US has the tech, Korea has the manufacturing capability. Right. We'll make your good tech even better, basically. And he stressed that bilateral investments need to be expanded both quantitatively and qualitatively to build a more stable and resilient supply chains.
All right, so we'll keep close tabs on what that actually amounts to. For now, according to, as you said, the presidential office, President Yoon's trip has amounted to a $4.4 billion different set of pledges, especially in areas of key techs related to future-oriented growth engines, semiconductors, EVs, clean energy source, contents. Go on.
Sorry, go on.
No, go on.
I was just going to say it's $4.4 billion now, but of course, as the trip goes on throughout the week, we could see that amount increase as well. That's all I was going to say.
All right. With that, we move on to our third keyword of the day.
Slight growth.
So the Korean economy returned to growth in the first quarter from the previous quarter, that is slightly above forecasts. I might have to bold point slightly. Tell us the details.
Yeah, it is a slight growth, but in times that we're living in now, even a slight growth is kind of, light at the end of the tunnel, if you will, or a slight respite, if you will. Now, according to preliminary data announced by the Bank of Korea, the country's real GDP gained 0.3% in the first quarter from the previous quarter. It was led by increased private spending, especially after all COVID-19, or pretty much all COVID-19 social distancing rules were lifted. Private consumption gained 0.5% on strong demand for entertainment and services. So basically all this pent-up spending on all this pent-up
need to spend
after all these restrictions were in place. We see a lot more people in cinemas, for example, out and about at Hangang parks and nightclubs and what have you. And so that's where all this consumption is coming from. Also, construction investments also increased 0.2% on quarter in Q1. That's because of, obviously, more buildings are being built, and those restrictions from the COVID-19 have been lifted in relation to that as well. Government spending also rose 0.1% on increased spending on in-kind social security benefits. Facility investments, on the other hand, declined 4% on the sluggish machinery sector, including semiconductor equipment. But the trade deficit from sluggish exports continued to pose a sluggish outlook for the economy. Exports continue to dwindle while imports jumped on the buying of chemical products. Now, Moody's Analytics said weak global demand and the down cycle in electronics are weighing on good exports. It forecast 1.4% growth for Korea this year. The Bank of Korea's forecast is 1.6%, so slightly higher. Korean domestic forecasts usually tend to be a bit higher than those of foreign analytics institutes. But the BOK governor Lee Chang-yong said earlier this month the outlook could be revised, so we'll have to see. China's reopening of the economy, for example, isn't really helping much here in Korea. Not as much as economists and some watchers were hoping for anyway. Right. That's because most of the recovery in China over there is centered on service spending and, of course, domestic demand and spending there as well. So, of course, that's not really going to have an impact on Korean or external economic cooperation and ties. But of course, that will change, or hopefully change, down the line as well.
That's the hope anyway. Certainly not helping South Korea's sad export numbers. You're right. There seems to be a common thread there. I mean, pent-up spending needs being alleviated due to lifted COVID restrictions. It's just much more massive in China, given how strict their restrictions were until they about phased from their zero COVID policies. But we'll have to wait and see what these numbers indicate for the latter half of the year. Let's turn our attention to our fourth keyword of the day.
Jail for DUI.
So the South Korean government is implementing tougher punishments on DUI violations. This comes amid public anger over the death of a 9-year-old girl killed by a drunk driver a couple of weeks ago. And it happened to be in, of course, a school zone where you're supposed to slow down. And that raises even more sense of urgency. Are these laws that had already been tweaked effective at all, that is?
That's right, exactly. I mean, the whole Minshik law that came into effect a couple of years ago, there's been a bit of controversy around that, to say some of the guidelines are a bit grey in some areas, and not really many people are really adhering to the rules as well. That came about after a boy of the same age, 9 years old, was also killed as well. So it's unfortunate to hear that this time a 9-year-old girl has been killed as a result of this DUI violation, especially in a zone where more prudence has been encouraged. Now, critics have been blaming kind of weak penalties for the continued death of children at the hands of drunk drivers, despite these toughened rules or laws. Now, in the case of a child being killed as a result of DUI in a school zone, a maximum of 26 years in jail, could be imposed. That's 10.5 years for injury, plus an additional 15 in the case of death. Now, it's the first such sentencing guidelines for DUI in school zones and will be applied in July. Now, if a child is injured, then the violator could also be fined between 3 million and 15 million won if there's mitigating circumstances and warranted reasons for reductions in the penalties. But if the injury is serious or it's not the violator's first offence, then of course that could mean up to 5 years in jail and even longer for other types of violations. There will also be tougher penalties according to the level of intoxication or if the perpetrator refuses a breathalyzer test as well. So it's a bit unfortunate that it's a bit common occurrence in Korea that something drastic has to happen, a tragedy has to happen for such laws and rules to be toughened and relevant policies to be put in place. But still better than nothing, I guess. We'll have to see how well this toughened laws work from July. But we'll have to keep our eyes open.
But it seems that the public consensus is highlighted, the fact that the need for tougher restrictions, especially against drunk driving in school zones, this consensus is shared. So we'll have to wait and see how these policies pan out and how it affects discouraging people from drunk driving at all. Let's move on to our final keyword of the day.
Back home.
So Korean nationals who were evacuated from the war-torn Sudan have arrived safely back in Korea. There are interviews out there of who have arrived safely home. What's the latest, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, it's not the first time that Korean nationals have been evacuated from, dangerous countries and war-torn countries, but this one took especially a lot of the headlines, considering how kind of excruciating the process was and how nerve-wracking and how under wraps it was as well. Now, a military tanker transport aircraft that took off from Jeddah in Saudi Arabia arrived at Seoul Air Base in Seongnam yesterday afternoon. The evacuation mission took days to carry out due to the threat of clashes on the ground, but succeeded thanks to help from Korean allies, including the United Arab Emirates. Defense Minister Lee Jong-sub and military officials greeted the Korean nationals who arrived. Their families were welcomed welcomed them with flowers and cakes. The government plans to provide them with medical checkups and other forms of support. And also, since Japanese nationals also accompanied the Korean nationals evacuating the country as well. It also held a meeting on their accommodations and other support measures. Related ministries such as the health ministry will also offer necessary support such as counseling and treatment. And according to the presidential office, the whole process was extremely chaotic because it certainly was dangerous, and also the information came from a few unconfirmed sources as well. And the foreign ministry here is also giving back. It's sharing information with other major countries who want to get their nationals out of the war-torn Sudan as well.
Thank you very much, Adam, for today's coverage. Have a good one, and we'll see you tomorrow.
You're very welcome. See you tomorrow.
If you're listening to our program using the podcast service, just a reminder that we do go live Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Korea Standard Time. So tune in and help us make the show more informative by giving us your input. See you bright and early on Good Morning Seoul.